Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine, messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you're too arrogant. And if you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power.
What's up? This is Femi here with Freedom Now, and your ears are in tuned at high frequencies in a liberated zone. Freedom Now is a Pan-Africanist, global news outlet from coast to coast, dispelling the Western propaganda media and their all lies point of views. Freedom Now is devoted to relay true news, views, and proper clues to form solutions around freedom for the oppressed worldwide. Now, get relaxed, grab a pen, and phone a friend, because Freedom Now is set to begin to awaken deep sleepers dreaming about freedom now, within, in, freedom now, in.
Love and hate can never be friends. Oh no, oh no. Here I come with love and not hatred. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow I all the days of my life. Envy no one, no wish to be with no evil man. For there'll come the day when you'll be whipped by the feathers and
Babarigani. This is Sister Thage with Freedom Now's agenda for this Saturday, December 24th, 2022. First, thank you to all who donated during our recent fund drive to support Freedom Now and KPFK. For today's program, we commence with our ancestor Didan Kamati in the African Drumbeat Historical Calendar. Then, prolific author, radical historian, professor of African American Studies at the University of Houston, and Freedom Now co-producer Dr. Gerald Horne interviews Jeb Sprag, writer for The Gray Zone, and research associate at University of California, Riverside, here to discuss his book, Globalizing the Caribbean, Political Economy, Social Change, and the Transnational Capitalist Class. And later in the hour, Dr. Horne interviews Millery Polyné, professor at NYU in Manhattan, here to discuss his book, From Douglas to Duvalier, U.S. African Americans, Haiti, and Pan-Americanism, from 1870 to 1964. Our music clip mix includes MLK, Zap Mama, Prison Radio Commentaries, Mingus Big Band, Gerald Wilson, Lee Morgan, McCoy Tyner, Horace Silver, Dennis Brown, and more. So sit back, tell a friend, and as always we stand ready for revolution.
oh yeah, Liverpool children, oh yeah. Forgive us, forgive us. African children, I wonder do they know where you're coming from? African children, now they live in a hungry situation. African children, I wonder do they know where you're coming from?
The American capitalist system, a backward system, has a way of presenting history as if history is made by one man, one great woman. And this great man, this great woman comes along and directs the dumb masses who follow them for whatever reasons, and they light up the way to show the people how to go in the darkness. So whenever you study, for example, the American Revolution, you say George Washington, that means you know everything. You say Abraham Lincoln. Even in recent years of the struggle today, you could say Martin Luther King. You see? The attempt is to make it appear as if history is made indeed by these great person. And usually our history is not made by us, but really made by one great person outside of our race, usually a great white man. Thus, in the Civil War, we did absolutely nothing. It was Abraham Lincoln. As a matter of fact, recently, some lot of garbage is written in books by people who call themselves historians, making it appear as if we have to thank Lyndon Baines Johnson for the advancement because he signed the Civil Rights Bill. Of course he signed it. But while he was signing it, we were in the streets burning the country down. You better hurry to sign it. Burn the whole country down. Do it quick. But if you're not careful, you will thank Lyndon Baines Johnson.
We have just heard Kwame Ture on history. This is Didan Kamathi with this week's edition of the African Drumbeat Historical Calendar. This internationalist calendar brings to our attention the righteous struggles of the oppressed women, workers, peasants, and nationalities who have been preyed upon by the economic systems of exploitation. We give life by praising up our struggle for a human-centered world. December 29, 1835, the Seminole Indian leader Oxelia Mekanopa and jumpers were victorious in defeating the U.S. Army in a joint African and Native American strategy. The United States attacked the Seminoles of Florida for the principal stand in providing a refuge for runaway African slaves in the Seminole nations where they were given full human rights. December 30th, 1939, Lourdes Casal Valdez was born, a Cuban-American poet, scholar, and radical activist. At first, she was not supportive of the Cuban Revolution and left Cuba to live in the United States. However, the racism she observed in the U.S. and her travels in 1962 to Africa, as well as her direct involvement in the U.S. Black liberation struggle, changed her views of socialism. She returned to Cuba in 1973 and traveled often between Cuba and the United States, organizing the Antonia Macheo Brigade to support the Cuban Revolution. December 29, 1923, Cheikh Anta Diop, the Pharaoh of Knowledge, a Senegalese Egyptologist, historian, anthropologist, physicist, and politician, was born. Considered the greatest African historian of the 20th century due to his PhD thesis at the University of Paris that documented that the ancient Egyptians were black. His continued research documented that the earliest known human civilizations in North Africa were black, not European. December 29, 1911, Dr. Sun Yat-sen is named the first president of the Republic of China and considered the father of the nation. Dr. Sun Yat-sen played a major role in overthrowing the 2,000 year of imperial or feudal dynasties of China. He led successful revolutionary governments to unite China, challenging Chinese warlords who controlled much of the divided nation of China. He was a fervent Pan-Asianist. Dr. Sun Yat-sen states that the problem between the East and the Europe is a cultural contradiction, the rule of right versus the rule of might. The rule of right, Asian culture, respects benevolence, good deeds, and virtue, whereas the rule of might respects only force and violence. Hence, Pan-Asianism must be based on a cultural foundation of the historical culture of the rule of right. December 30th, 1904, Japan defeats Russia over contested land in Manchuria and Korea. This is the first time in the last several hundred years an Asiatic country defeats a European power, which gives inspiration to the anti-colonial Asian movements. December 30th, 1890, the massacre at Wounded Knee. 200 old men, women, and children were slaughtered by the United States Army during an armed conflict between the Oglala Lakota and the U.S. Army seeking ethnic cleansing. The U.S. government broke a Lakota Treaty Agreement establishing the Great Sioux Reservation in order to accommodate European settler, colonialist, insatiable desire for Native American land. December 31st, 1917, Dr. Yosef Ben Yochanan, historian, Egyptologist, is born in Gondar, Ethiopia. Dr. Ben is the author of numerous books primarily on the ancient Nile Valley civilization and their impact on Western civilization. His writings include We the Black Jews, Africa, Mother of Western Civilization, African Origins of Modern Western Civilization, Black Men of the Nile, and numerous others. Dr. Ben trained cadres of Africans and U.S. scholars on Africa's proper contribution to world civilization, combating the European anthropological view that Africa had no history until the Europeans stepped foot in Africa. January 1st, 1789, Haiti gains independence. Haiti was the first liberated nation and republic in the Western Hemisphere, providing a continued model of African resistance to oppression. Historically and today, the United States and France have targeted Haiti for permanent destabilization. This is due to its historical role as a beacon of African self-determination. January 1st, 1923, Africa's foremost film director and writer, Ousmane Sembène, was born at Casamance, Senegal. He was a Wolof Muslim and is considered the father of African films. He was a member of the French Communist Party and a trade unionist in his younger days, and evolved to become the leading Pan-Africanist filmmaker. The themes of his films address social change and contradictions in African society, as well as their interaction with the French colonial and neo-colonial regime. A partial list of his most famous films include Zala, Chedo, Fate Kene, Molade, and Mandambi. January 1st, 1994, the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement is signed, and the indigenous people of Chiapas, Mexico declare war. The Mayans, under the leadership of the Zapatista, the armed revolutionary group based in the poorest state in Mexico, built autonomous regions breaking from the Mexican neo-colonial government. The Zapatistas are part of the anti-globalization social movements, as well as return to the indigenous pre-Columbus cultural and social relations. January 1st, 1959, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara lead a group of students, intellectuals, and workers to overthrow the CIA and mafia-controlled Batista regime, giving rise to the oldest socialist government in the Western Hemisphere, Cuba. This is the second socialist revolution in the Western region, the first being the democratically elected government of Dr. Chetty Jagan of Guyana in 1954. Every U.S. president since Dwight Eisenhower, numbering 13, have all pledged to overthrow the socialist government off the coast of Florida. And every U.S. administration has failed due to the ideological and organizational sophistication of the masses of Cubans who are fully involved with the Cuban Revolution. January 1st, 1804, Sister Duvalier, an African prisoner of war leader, was born. She was a Dambala priestess, practitioner of African dance rituals, and the wife of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Haiti's first president. As a priestess, she used religion as an ideological weapon of liberation to organize slaves and called for the rebellion against French colonialism, which led to Haiti's independence. January 2nd, 1920, over 5,000 people are arrested in the anti-radical Palmer raids by the United States government. In June 1917, the U.S. Congress passes the Espionage Act, setting punishments for acts of interference in foreign policy. Prison terms of up to 20 years are set for anyone who obstructs the military draft or encourages disloyalty against the U.S. government in its foreign policy. This has been the African Drumbeat Historical Calendar here at Freedom Now.
This is Gerald Horne for KPFK, kpfk.org, and with me on the line is Jeb Sprag, Research Associate at the University of California at Riverside, writer for The Gray Zone, and author of the book Globalizing the Caribbean, Political Economy, Social Change, and the Transnational Capitalist Class. Welcome to Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Jeb Sprag.
Thank you, Dr. Horne. It's a real pleasure and honor to be able to speak with you.
The same holds true on this end. So why did you produce this book, Globalizing the Caribbean?
Well, I first traveled to the Caribbean on a labor delegation right after the coup in 2004. I had been involved in the anti-war movement. My father was a conscientious objector in the Vietnam War, and my cousin was in the war in Iraq, and I still take care of him some. He suffers from extreme PTSD. So I got involved in the Caribbean really as anti-imperialist activism, and then morphed into journalism, and then eventually went into academia and wrote the first book on Haiti, and then the second book on the political economy of the region.
You wrote your first book on Haiti. Talk to us about Haiti, because we know that the relationship between that island in the Caribbean and the United States has been star-crossed, to put it mildly. We know about the occupation of U.S. imperialism for about 20 years, from about 1915 to the mid-1930s. We know about the role of the United States in dislodging governments. Give us a snapshot of what you've had to say and write about the United States and Haiti.
Sure. Well, I would start by saying that your work looking at the in the 19th century with the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and how the Dominican Republic was really, its historical genesis was a sort of a hammer, a sword to be used against the struggle of the Haitian people, and in a very racist attack, backlash against the liberation movement in the country. And so my work has focused more on contemporary events in the later part of the 20th century and in the early 2000s, looking at the structuring of coercive force during the Cold War with the Tonton Macoutes under the Duvalier dictatorship, and then up through the transition into democracy, that brief interregnum of democratic governance under Aristide and Preval's first term in office and Aristide's second term, and my work then really focused on the relaunching of paramilitarism to take down this democratic movement in Haiti, the paramilitary groups that was really covered very little in the media in Haiti and in the international media. This sort of miniature contra campaign that really took down the Aristide's second government by this death by 1,000 cuts. And the book looks in detail at the different raids and attacks and assassinations. And at the same time, the attempt by the Aristide government to hold paramilitaries accountable, having trials for the first time in the country's history, having on TV these trials and in the newspaper for people to learn about, the impunity was no longer going to be. Yeah, it looks real in depth at that whole process. And then also what happened after the coup with the relaunching of these more formal paramilitary groups working alongside the police to massacre protesters in the streets. And I think that whole historical period is very important to look at, because Haiti today, it shares a lot in common with what's happened in Guatemala, where the paramilitaries and their financiers completely got off the hook. There's no process of when we call denazification. These people have not been held accountable for the massacres, the killings that they conducted. And so they walk around freely in the country. The same has happened in Guatemala. And so that's the first book, the Paramilitarism and the Assault on Democracy in Haiti.
So you mentioned financiers of these paramilitaries. Are any of them in Haiti or even in Guatemala cited in South Florida?
Oh, that's very a keen observation. Yes, South Florida is like a nexus for elites across the region, and not just Spanish-speaking elites, but also from Haiti, French-speaking elites. And so, some of the wealthiest people travel on their private jets on small planes to Miami to do shopping on the weekend, or go to their luxury mansions, but there are definitely large handful of elites, Haitian elites, and others that are involved in supporting paramilitaries that live in Miami.
Now, we know that the late president of Haiti was assassinated on July 7, 2021 at 1 a.m. in his bed. Apparently, there were some so-called freelancers from Colombia involved. Apparently, connections to the assassination led back to South Florida. Could you talk to us about that assassination and its current repercussions?
Yeah, I wrote a large piece about it with a Haitian colleague soon after it happened that you can find on the Gray Zone. But yeah, it's a very tragic event in a country that its sovereignty has just been year after year eroded away. And the latest that I've seen is there's solid evidence that one of the guys that was involved in the killing was also working with the FBI or an informant with FBI. So there's a lot of murky ties between the security agencies in Haiti and that assassin. Jovenel Moise, this wasn't like a hero of the working class. This was essentially a fight within ruling right-wing factions within the country, and he was killed.
Now let's turn the coin over and talk about Cuba, which has been under a U.S.-initiated blockade for decades now. And despite that fact, Cuba has progressive foreign policy in the region, up to and including sending medics to places like Haiti. Talk to us about the role of Cuba in the Caribbean and the prospects, perhaps, for ending the blockade.
Yeah, I mean, Cuba, I have a quote right here from the late Jamaican journalist John Maxwell. Maybe you knew him. He was one of the region's greatest journalists. And from 2008, where he writes, in 1963, Cuba dispatched a medical brigade to Algeria, then still bleeding from a successful but incredibly bloody war of independence against France. Fortuitously, on the same day in 2008, a consignment of 4.5 tons of serum, medicines, and sanitary materials donated by Cuba arrived in the earthquake-ravaged capital of the Chinese province of Sichuan to help some of those injured in the May 12th earthquake. In the 45 years between those events, the Cuban people have sent abroad as many health workers as U.S. troops in Iraq, 140,000 of them, to more than 100 foreign countries, some considerably richer than Cuba, but all in need of help. They range from Nicaragua to Pakistan, Venezuela to Vietnam, Haiti and Jamaica to Angola and Bolivia. So I think his quote is perfect to summarize Cuba's role in the region and worldwide.
Now, Cuba has also played a role in education in terms of training medics and doctors at Cuban schools and universities and other technical fields, not only for folk in the Caribbean, but for the African continent as well. And let's turn the coin back over. What about this concept of neoliberalism, which we see tossed around quite a bit? How does neoliberalism fit into the story that you tell in your book, Globalizing the Caribbean?
Well, we can, it's a very large discussion, but we can look at countries, for example, like I just mentioned, Jamaica or Barbados, where in Barbados, an IMF, International Monetary Fund representative sits within the country's central bank. They place an IMF representative in like the most central financial institutions. In Jamaica, officials have to report daily to IMF staff residing in the country. So as this political economic restructuring has occurred across the country with finance and production and how businesses link into global capital flows, we see the logic of capital seeping into every pore of the political economy, and any sort of areas of the economy that are protected or off limits are sought to be privatized and brought into this logic of the market. And so, a lot has been written on this as a global phenomenon, and we can't separate the Caribbean from the world. We have to look at it as entwined.
Speaking of which, we've been focusing on the role of the United States in the Caribbean, in the region, but we know that historically, for example, the former colonizer in both Jamaica and Barbados was London. The former colonizer in Haiti was France. What about the role of the European Union in the region? Do you detect any sorts of contradictions between the European Union and Washington that perhaps progressive forces can play upon, or do you see a basic unity in terms of how they approach the region?
That's interesting. Yeah, there are sort of commonality in a way, unified interests, but also divisions that you can see. I mean, going back, authors like Gordon Lewis, where they talk about the moral epistemology of empire, they look at the divisions between English, French, and Spanish-speaking areas of the West Indies, and you look at that long history of European colonialism and how it ended in different parts of the region at different times. When British imperialists, when the process of decolonization, when it played out, there's a famous quote by an author where he talks about how British imperialists they expressed amazement and great satisfaction that after they had left, they had created people that would internalize the British values and cultural norms. So, it's a real struggle internally to separate from that and to create something new, and out of that history that pulls back on us. But I think if we look at today in regards to the European Union and the United States, I mean, if we look at a country like Haiti, they've essentially been on the same page. It's probably more countries like China or India or Russia or places in the global south where there's some maneuver for policy differences.
Speaking of those latter countries, we know that the president of Cuba, President Diaz-Canel, just completed a lengthy foreign journey where he visited Turkey, Russia, and China. We also know that that'll probably lead to tighter relations between the island of freedom, speaking of Cuba, and these other countries I've just mentioned. And China, as in Africa, has been expanding its interests in the region. For example, it's a major player in the economy of the Bahamas. Anything to add with regard to China's role in the region?
Well, the large freeway from Kingston going up through the spine of Jamaica, I think, was built largely with Chinese companies and bringing over of engineers and architects. I mean, one problem that small economies, small countries face is developing the technological and infrastructure, ability to carry out large developments. And so China plays such an important role there in so many places of the global south without putting a lot of the pressures on these countries that the U.S. and the European do to fall in line with their different policies that they require. But I think, the region needs to find alternatives. I mean, we can just see even though the U.S. direct occupation of so many countries might not be happening, this coercive violence plays out in other ways. So, for example, the Venezuelan opposition economist Francisco Rodriguez, he says that the U.S. economic war on Venezuela has done the damage of about 3 nuclear bombs, as if 3 nuclear bombs had been dropped on the country. So, our country is just so constantly throughout this history that we look at involved in violence against people in the region.
Finally, Jeb Sprag, author of the book Globalizing the Caribbean, Political Economy, Social Change in the Transnational Capitalist Class, research associate at University of California, Riverside, and writer for The Gray Zone. What about the impact of COVID in the region, given the fact that so many of the Caribbean nations have become heavily dependent upon tourism? But I understand that the impact of COVID has been devastating in terms of keeping tourists far distant from Jamaica, Barbados, Antigua, Trinidad and Tobago, etc. Anything to add on that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting on one hand. I mean, I thought that the cost of lives on COVID would be much harder on the region when COVID first began. But there are some recent studies coming out looking at how places in Central America and the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa that were where the populations had already been through so many rounds of these different anti-malarial and different drugs like ivermectin and things from the up through the 80s and 90s into the recent period, that and there's other factors as well that probably why the deaths were so low. But in regards to the economic impact, it was very devastating on the region with because of the importance of tourism and global investment for different jobs, and even when we look at like subcontractors and small businesses, right, tied into all these different chains and global financial flows. So the region can't be separated out. Lots of times in the sort of dominant rhetoric of our world, liberal philosophy, right, it tries to separate everything out where things become fragmented. And so the outcome is nothing but fragments. But we have to restore all this all this different information into a totality. So we have to look at the Caribbean not as its own, but connected to the totality, a complex and heterogeneous totality.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Jeb Sprag, research associate at University of California, Riverside, and author of the book Globalizing the Caribbean. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
This is Sister Flora, and you are listening to Freedom Now at KPFK 90.7 FM in occupied Mexico, including Los Angeles, 98.7 FM Santa Barbara, 93.7 FM in San Diego, and streaming live on the web at kpfk.org. Today's program, as well as 10 prior editions, can be reheard at kpfk.org/audio archive, and scroll down to Freedom Now. From 12 to 1 p.m., following Freedom Now is our sister Assumpta, with Spotlight Africa addressing issues facing Mother Africa. For a truly alternative international perspective on world affairs, check out RTTV Russia, CCTV China, and online at Presna, Latina Cuba Telesur Venezuela, News 24 South Africa, and Press TV Iran.
And now we go to our prison radio commentaries. From political prisoner journalist Mumia Bujamal on the Human Rights Council, and then to Brother Sheikh Bilal Abdul Salam Bey for an update on his clemency hearing on January 17th, 2023, which is just around the corner.
To members, affiliates, and supporters of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, foreign ministers, and representatives of 54 African member states, we thank you for your attempts to protect African-descended persons in the United States, especially in the wake of the notorious asphyxiation of George Floyd and the immense protests that filled the streets of cities around the world as a direct response thereto. Your attempt gave hope to millions of people who feared becoming the next George Floyd. Your work, supported by the UN Charter, the UN Declaration on Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the Convention Against Torture, the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance, the International Decade for People of African Descent of 23rd December 2013, and other articles of international law gave hope to those living on the brink in U.S. ghettos, in prisons, and the dark, dank holes of death row and beyond. We thank you for your work to breathe life into these documents and make them real tools of social change. When people saw our lives through the tragedy of George Floyd, the state violence that brought him to his end, cities in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas erupted in solidarity and protest. We thank you for your efforts on behalf of human rights. With love, not fear. This is Mumia Abu Jamal. These commentaries are recorded by Prison Radio.
This is Bilal Abdul Salam Bey, calling from Hutchinson Correctional Facility in Hutchinson, Kansas. This piece is just an update on my clemency, what's going on with me. I have a clemency hearing coming up January 17th, 2023, and if granted, I will be getting immediate release, so I need as much support as possible. To those that have been supporting me in the past, I appreciate all efforts and energy, and thank everyone for their time. Anyone wishing to make comments can do so by writing me at Charlie Hughes, CharleyHughes, number 96576, P.O. Box 1568, Hutchinson, Kansas 67504. Once again, thank you for your time, efforts, and energy.
These commentaries are recorded by Prison Radio.
Who knocks out everybody and no one can whoop him. That's when that little Cassius Clay from Louisville, Kentucky came up and stopped Sonny Liston, the man who annihilated Floyd Patterson twice. He was going to kill me. But he hit harder than George. His reach was longer than George. He was a better boxer than George. And I'm better now than I was when you saw that 22-year-old undeveloped kid running from Sonny Liston. I'm experienced now, professional. Jaw's been broke, been lost, knocked down a couple of times. Bad. Been chopping trees. I done something new for this fight. I done wrestled with an alligator. That's right. I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail. That's bad. Only last week, I murdered a rock, injured a stone, hospitalized a brick. I'm so mean, I make medicine sick.
Man, dude.
Yeah. Fast. Last night I cut the light off in my bedroom, hit the switch, was in the bed before the room was dark.
Incredible.
Fast.
Incredible.
And you, George Foreman, all of you chumps are gonna bow when I whoop him. All of you. I know you got him. I know you got him picked, but the man's in trouble. I'm gonna show you how great I am.
We will now continue with historian Professor Dr. Gerald Horne.
This is Gerald Horne for KPFK, kpfk.org. And with me on the line is Millery Polyné, professor at New York University in Manhattan and author of the book From Douglas to Duvalier, U.S. African Americans, Haiti, and Pan-Americanism, 1870 to 1964. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Professor Polyné.
It's really a pleasure, Dr. Horne. I've been a long admirer of your work, so thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. So why did you write this book, From Douglas to Duvalier?
Well, I wrote this book because it's first personal and also some of the historical issues that I wanted to deal with. personal because I grew up a child of Haitian immigrants in Boston, Massachusetts, and at the same time I lived a life as seeing myself identifying as African American, both as Haitian American, and I remember, very sort of watershed important moments in my life that helped me identify with both cultures, particularly say 1986 when Baby Doc is exiled from Haiti, and I see my parents, who I didn't really see as political, sort of clamoring and answering the phone, and sort of a chaotic moment in the house, and I really saw my parents as sort of political beings who were talking politics and about Haiti in very animated and passionate ways. And so I really, at that moment, wanted to know more and learn more about the country. It wasn't something that they talked a tremendous amount in the house. So I just remember that being really a watershed moment for myself and my sort of own sort of political and cultural identity. And again, in terms of historically, as a graduate student at the University of Michigan, I was doing my doctoral research, and I began to just go through the NAACP papers, and began to see Walter White, who was executive director of the NAACP, who was talking a lot about Haiti. And then I began to see these amazing images and paintings by Jacob Lawrence on the Haitian Revolution. I was a big jazz head and loved Charles Mingus. I remember singing the song, the Haitian Fight Song. And so in my head, I'm thinking, there's just absolutely something there for me that I wanted to learn more about this relationship that clearly goes back into the 19th century, through literature, through politics, through business, very sort of cultural developments and cultural artifacts that I thought were really fascinating and important. And then it went from there. I wanted to learn more about this relationship, and I began to dig deeper, and I found that there's just this legacy of these two groups interacting with one another and trying to improve and better each other's lives.
Now, the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, was a landmark in the hemisphere. It's a landmark in terms of Pan-Africanism. What impact specifically did the Haitian Revolution have on slavery in the United States and in the hemisphere?
Well, it's layered, right? It's for one, in one aspect, when the revolution begins in 1791, you have many scholars like Michel Rothriot talking about this moment as unthinkable for many slaveholders, the plantocracy of the time period. They couldn't believe that something like this was happening, in which it was a sort of a total transformation of the system itself. And so, with regards to the U.S. South, you have a tremendous moment in which the slaveholders of the South are trying to sort of protect and not have enslaved peoples in the U.S. South sort of hear about this important moment. So you have sort of the spreading of this information that's happening in not only in issues in Congress, but also in newspapers throughout the South and the North. And so word is spreading about this revolution and its impact upon sugar plantations and indigo plantations and all, various different plantations and economies within Saint-Domingue, Haiti, later Haiti, but also its sort of reverberations outside of not outside of the country itself, in which you have this mass migration of Haitians, of white French slaveholders, in addition to some of their enslaved peoples who were traveling with them to New Orleans, to South Carolina, and other places, to Cuba, trying to leave and escape, flee the violence and the revolt that's happening. And so this has an impact upon the sort of clamping down on slave laws in the U.S. South. And so, it goes on and on in various different parts of the South, in which plantation owners are trying their best to hold back and try and protect their economic interests in the South, so that enslaved peoples in the U.S. would also not revolt.
So we also know that the Black American leader, speaking of Frederick Douglass, also had a relationship to Haiti. Talk to us about that.
So yeah, Frederick Douglass, we see Douglass as a diplomat of the United States, and early on he's an emissary for the United States around 1870, and later in the 1880s he serves as U.S. minister to Haiti. And so Douglass, who's this towering figure within the United States, who is trying to maintain sort of his lifestyle in D.C. and trying to maintain connections within sort of Washington with Washington officials. He gets this position as one emissary to the United States, and going to see if it's a possibility to annex Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic at the time. And so that early sort of interaction with Santo Domingo, with the United States, becomes sort of controversial, because one wonders, okay, well, why is Douglass involved in this relationship to potentially annex the United States, annex Santo Domingo? And we see the ways in which the United States is part of sort of this early example of empire building by the U.S. into the Caribbean, into Latin America. And so one wonders, okay, why is Douglass part of this? And so Douglass is very much thinking about, well, this could be an important way for not only Santo Domingo, but also potentially Haiti to sort of bolster their relationship with the United States, to help Haitians and Santo Domingans to gain access to various different resources, to help them with regards to education and things of that nature. That ultimately that does not work out; it fails. But this sort of establishes this sort of early relationship with Douglass to the island, where he travels there and wants to really. This is sort of seen as this notion of sort of racial uplift, and so it becomes a very sort of controversial idea at the time of annexation. So that's with regards to sort of Santo Domingo, but sort of later on when he's U.S. minister to Haiti, there's also another sort of moment in which the United States is trying to gain more sort of military and financial access into the region. And the U.S. is very much interested in annexing this part of Haiti called Mont Saint-Nicolas, which is in sort of the northwestern part of Haiti. And Haitian officials are very much against it and reject it. And Douglas is, as the U.S. diplomat, is supposed to negotiate this sort of transfer of land, and it does not happen. It's sort of a long, sort of complicated story, but ultimately it does not happen, and Douglas sort of backs off, and this sort of strains his relationship with Washington officials. But Douglas really sees a moment in which, if various countries, particularly Haiti, would sort of strengthen their relationship with the United States, and in part, even annexing parts of the country to the United States, that this would be beneficial for them. He listens and understands the position of Haitian officials, and so he backs off a bit, as I said before. And so we see sort of this another moment in which African Americans and Haitian officials and the United States are in this sort of complicated moment of trying to cooperate with one another, negotiate with one another, maintain sovereignty and independence. At the same time, try to build economic and political relationships post U.S. emancipation in the 1860s, 1870s.
And a few decades after Frederick Douglass was an emissary to the island, in the 20th century, we witnessed a U.S. occupation of Haiti. Why did the United States occupy Haiti? How long was the occupation? And what was the ultimate impact of that occupation?
Yeah, so the occupation happens in 1915. And what we see is, from sort of late 19th century, early 20th century, Haiti going through a lot of sort of tremendous political and economic sort of turmoil internally, sort of a change of regime for a number of years. And so this begins a notion of Caribbean, Latin American political instability. And the United States believes that, since the 1820s with the Monroe Doctrine, that this is their backyard, this is their space, and that somehow the United States must control and make sure that this political instability doesn't impact or disrupt U.S. interests, whether it be U.S. business interests in sugar trade, production, or other types of relationship, whether it be technological also. And so because of this sort of internal political instability, the United States sends U.S. Marines, many of them Southern-born soldiers, into Haiti, and they take over. And it's a 19-year U.S. occupation. We find that the U.S. is also in other parts of the Caribbean. A year after, in 1915, when the U.S. invaded Haiti, they then invaded the Dominican Republic in 1916. You see them later, and earlier they were in Cuba, and later they're in places like Nicaragua and Guatemala and other places. And so this is part of a U.S. empire project at the time. So ultimately, this impact of U.S. presence in Haiti, we find that that the U.S. Marines are sort of implementing a Jim Crow policy of some racial segregation within Haiti, and obviously this is quite problematic in the country. You find that there's an attempt to sort of to build roads, to build sort of an infrastructure that was slowly being built by Haitians themselves in terms of a railroad and other things, electricity. But you find that this is a way in which U.S. interests, business interests, and businessmen are finding a tremendous presence. Many scholars have written about the role of the U.S. Bank and sort of Citigroup, the Citibank, National Citibank, who have taken over Haitian finances, and so that has a tremendous adverse impact upon the Haitian economy. The fact that the United States has taken over Haitian finances, and that financial intervention happens even beyond the 19-year occupation into the 1940s. And so the U.S. impact is long lasting. It happens with regards to infrastructurally and financially, culturally, socially, with regards to Jim Crow laws. Even with regards to infrastructurally, in terms of the building of roads, this is a forced labor by the U.S. Marines on Haitians. And when you're talking about the building of roads, you're also talking about the displacement of people. So it really does have a tremendous adverse impact upon the development of the country.
Finally, Professor Polyné, professor at New York University, author of the book From Douglas to Duvalier, U.S. African Americans, Haiti, and Pan-Americanism, 1870 to 1964. What next is on your research agenda?
So I've been working with a colleague of mine, Patricia Lespinasse, on thinking about the moment of discovering AIDS in the United States and the world, and the ways in which Haitians have been part of that unfortunate sort of story about, when U.S. scientists and scientists are trying to figure out, how is AIDS spreading? How are we getting? And unfortunately, from the scientists of the Food and Drug Administration, Center for Disease Control, many of your listeners may remember in the 1980s, it comes out with an examination of the 4 H's. And it's homosexuals, hypodermic drug users, hemophiliacs, and Haitians. There's this sort of 4H group in terms of these are the people that should not donate blood. And so I'm interested in the Haitian activists who, from student activists to some of the elders in the community, who were truly trying to fight to get Haitians off of that list. It was very detrimental to their advancement, and we've been working on a documentary thinking about this important issue and this time period, and how Haitians were able to get off that list, and this legacy of protest and Haitian mobilization against this racist policy by the FDA and the CDC.
Well, we look forward to that production. Professor Polyné, professor at New York University, author of the book From Douglas to Duvalier, U.S. African Americans, Haiti, and Pan-Americanism, 1870 to 1964. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
Thank you so much.
And in closing, we'd like to thank our guests, Jeb Sprag and Millery Polyné, our producers, Dr. Gerald Horne, Sister Femi, Sister Flora, Brother Brandon, our board op, and all those who made today's program possible. Stay tuned for our sister Assumpta coming up next with Spotlight Africa, addressing issues facing Mother Africa. Signing off for Freedom Now, this is Sister Thage. And until next week, as always, we stand ready for revolution.